Alright, we are live. We are live. We are live. We are live. Alright, this morning we're looking into Shairi. We're looking into Shairi. We have built this beautiful poster for Claude Azam, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Claude Azam means Claude the Great, and I think it's a beautiful way to it's a beautiful name. It's a beautiful name. I think Claude came up with that name, and then we designed this with Grok. And it's also interesting how to design this because you have to mention something like, oh, uh, make it in a Mughal emperor way with the grandeur of Mughal empire, with ornates and a certain calligraphy and a lot of jolly design and peacock and gold and stuff like that. So very interesting. All right, so what are we looking into? I just came up with this talk with a new format for naming our live streams. It's really important to name our live streams in a certain way, and that gave us some interesting. Yeah, that gave us some interesting outlook. So very interesting. All right, so what is today's rabbit hole? We'll also pick interesting topics. I think it's going to force us to also find interesting narratives, interesting story arcs that we're going to dive deeper into. What is the philosophy behind the Pirates of the Caribbean, the first movie? Let's see. We're using Claude or we are specifically using Fable for a very interesting use case, which is just curiosity. I think curiosity is interesting. We were looking into this, we were looking into the fact that a lot of people today, when they're having conversations, there are always some sort of hidden agenda behind all those conversations. Very rarely the conversations are truth seeking. I was having a conversation with a buddy, and in between he adds something. I was talking with this one person, and we were having great conversation. And in between, he added something weird, and I'm like, I think that doesn't. It's like a. And I was like, I thought we are having a truth-seeking conversation where we both are sharing our experiences, and our goal is to find what's true. I'm not saying I know everything. You don't know everything, and nobody knows everything. So what we are doing is we are finding the truth. This conversation is going to be evolving, and it will be truth-seeking. And I think that was a good perspective, because now every time I have a conversation, I'm like, okay, this is truth seeking. What we are doing is we are seeking truth. I'm not saying I know everything. I'm also constantly evolving my frameworks of thinking. Our frameworks are getting more high fidelity. We're increasing the fidelity of our frameworks. It's obviously getting more complex, and you have to simplify at the same time. You create a framework, and slowly, as you share with other people, the framework gets complicated, and then after a while you have to just again simplify it. So there's a constant oscillation between extreme simplification and extreme complication. Let's look into this. The first Pirates of the Caribbean film, The Curse of the Black Pearl, is more philosophically rich than its swashbuckling surface suggests. Swashbuckling. Freedom has the highest value. Jack Sparrow's famous line about the Black Pearl, I think, very interesting. Again, I was talking with Braxton. Braxton has joined the school of streaming. We have to also, let me see, create prompt to design a beautiful logo for my WhatsApp group chat called School of Streaming. It's basically a bunch of members who are all starting to stream, and we are helping them stay accountable with streaming, being curious, evolving, and being more sharing their work, entering into flow state. Let's see. I think Claude is really good at generating prompt. Modern minimalist logo for School of Streaming, create a community of live streamers, a glowing play button on broadcasting, an icon merged with an open book or graduation cap, symbolizing learning and growth, flowing wave-like lines radiating outward to represent flow state, and creative energy, vibrant gradient of electric purple, deep blue, and warm coral. Interesting. Let's see what Grok generates. So one of my friends, we just had a beautiful conversation. He was explaining me the entire philosophy of Pirates of the Caribbean. And we were talking about, again, this idea that again, living on the extremes is helpful because then you understand what is the middle way. The goal is to live in the middle, the goal is to follow the middle way, but in order to understand where is the middle, you have to live on the extremes. So he lived on both the extremes. He lived as a pirate where you are breaking all the rules, and you lived as someone who is bounded by all the rules of the society, and then you realize that okay, in the middle there are some rules that you have to follow, and there are some rules that it's okay to break. So you are okay to breaking some rules, and you are okay, and there are a lot of rules that you should be following to make life easy. This is also interesting. You're getting kind of two AIs to compete against each other. I'm like, okay, Claude, you didn't do a good job. Grok did a good job at following with Claude. You didn't do a good job at imagining. You need to imagine this really well. Those are peak AI slop greedy norm. Let's see this one. Ultra minimalist logo, single continuous line forming a play button that dissolves into a flowing ink stroke. Geometric monogram. Swiss design. School of streaming. How would Dieter Rams redesign it? School of streaming. SOS. Quite simple. Loose pencil, thin outline with one corner trailing off into a gentle flowing line. School of streaming. Interesting. What is this? With one corner trailing off into a gentle flowing line, suggesting a current or stream of water. Monochrome black on bone white with a single tiny accent dot in vermilion red. School of streaming logo. What if I just say that? School of streaming, generate more. Really bad AS slop design. Think harder. Okay, so you will let it think harder, and then we go back over here. While the black pill captures the film's core idea, the ship isn't just a vessel, it's freedom itself. Jack represents a life lived entirely outside society's structures. No king, no commission, no fixed identity. The film consistently asks what freedom costs and whether it's worth that price. Notably, the cursed crew is the dark mirror of this. The cursed crew is a dark mirror of this. They pursued unlimited freedom and gain. unlimited freedom and gain, and ended up in the ultimate unfreedom, unable to die, unable to feel, enslaved to their own greed. They pursued unlimited freedom and gain, and ended up in the ultimate unfreedom, unable to die, unable to feel, enslaved to their own greed. The Course is meditation of desire and embodiment. I haven't watched this movie, so I don't know what it is about, but this is interesting. When you are only seeking freedom, when your life is all about freedom, again, it has to be balanced. You have to balance this thing out. Unable to die, I don't know what that means, unable to die. The Course as a meditation on desire and embodiment. Barbossa's crew can taste food, feel wind, or experience pleasure. Barbossa's crew can't taste food, can't taste food, feel wind, or experience pleasure. They have everything: immortality, wealth, and can enjoy nothing. Okay, now I need to know what made them unable to die. Stole a chest of cursed Aztec gold. The curse spoke like this: each gold coin belonged to an ancient treasure dedicated to the gods. Anyone who took even one single coin became cursed. The cursed person could not truly live or die. In moonlight, they appeared as skeletons, revealing their true state. They felt no pleasure, warmth, taste, or physical satisfaction. They could be wounded when not killed. Barbossa describes it beautifully. He says they cannot savor food, feel a woman's touch, or enjoy the simple pleasures that make life worth living. They gained what many people fantasize about: endless wealth and immortality, but in doing so, they lost the very capacity to experience life. This is why the Course is philosophically interesting. It turns the common wish, I want unlimited pleasure and limited life, into you can have unlimited life but no pleasure. The film's answer is that mortality is not a defect in human life. Mortality is what gives experiences their intensity and value. In a strange way, Barbossa becomes one of the movie's deepest philosophers. He spends the entire film trying not to become immortal, but mortal again. The pirates discover a paradox: freedom without limits becomes a prison. Wealth without enjoyment becomes meaningless. Life without death ceases to feel like life. The Course is almost a Hollywood version of an old insight found in traditions from Epicurus to the Bhagavad Gita and many Buddhist teachings. Attachment to endless possession often creates suffering rather than fulfillment. Attachment to endless possession often creates suffering rather than fulfillment. The pirates don't fear death anymore, they fear never being able to die. Can't taste food, feel wind, or experience pleasure. They have everything: immortality, wealth, and can enjoy nothing. Barbossa's speech about apples and feeling expresses a genuinely philosophical point: sensation, mortality, and limitation are what make experience meaningful. Sensation, mortality, and limitation are what make experience meaningful. Being unable to die sounds like power, but turns out to be hell. It's almost an argument that finitude is constitutive of a good life. Identity versus social role. Will Turner spends the film denying his pirate blood, clinging to respectability as a blacksmith. Elizabeth Swann is suffocating in the corset, literally and symbolically, of aristocratic womanhood. Respectability as a blacksmith. Elizabeth Swann is suffocating in the corset, literally and symbolically, of aristocratic womanhood. Both arcs are about discovering that the self society assigned them isn't the true one. The film's resolution suggests authenticity matters more than propriety. The film's resolution suggests authenticity matters more than propriety. Governor Swan ultimately accepts that perhaps the right course requires an act of piracy. Perhaps the right course requires an act of piracy. Act of piracy. Both arcs are about discovering that the self society assigned them isn't the true one. Moral ambiguity and the good man question. The film repeatedly blurs the line between law and virtue. Commodore Norrington is lawful, but rigid. Jack is lawless, but as the movie keeps hinting, decent in ways that matter. The recurring exchange about Jack being either the best or worst pirate anyone's seen, and Norrington's eventual admission that Jack deserves a head start, frame the question: is goodness about following the rules or about character revealed in choices? Norrington's eventual admission that Jack deserves a head start framed the question: is goodness about following rules or about character revealed in choices? The pirate code itself, which turns out to be more what you would call guidelines than actual rules, winks at the idea that all moral systems require judgment rather than blind obedience. Rules versus pragmatism. Related to that, the film has a running skepticism about rigid systems. Jack survives by improvising. Norrington nearly loses everything by adhering to the procedure. The movie isn't nihilistic about rules, but it endorses flexibility, wit, and adaptability over formalism. So, if you wanted to summarize it in one line, the film argues: the film has a running skepticism about rigid systems. Jack survives by improvising. Norrington nearly loses everything by adhering to procedure. The movie isn't nihilistic about rules, but it endorses flexibility, wit, and adaptability over formalism. Tell me more about the role of contrast. What does the concept of what role does the concept of contrast play in every aspects of life, from philosophy to relationship to animation to technology to storytelling? I think this contrast thing is very beautiful. I was talking to one of my friends who's an animator, and he mentioned that one of the problems with AI today, you quickly know what is AI generated when you look at how linear it is. There is no contrast. Like, I think it's really beautiful what he said, because if you look at, okay, this is really bad. What is Grok doing? So look at this. If you look at this, it's kind of weird. If you look at all these videos, they're very linear. They're very linear, very smooth motion. Very smooth motion. You have to understand contrast. You have to understand contrast. We need to bring contrast. I think that's the last thing to bring over here. That's the last thing to bring into AI. Contrast being one of the few generally universal principles. It shows up everywhere because it's baked into how meaning itself works. Let me trace it through the domains you mentioned: philosophy and perception. At the deepest level, contrast may be a precondition for experience at all. Heraclitus argued that opposites define each other. You wouldn't know justice without injustice, health without sickness. Taoism builds its entire metaphysics on this yin and yang aren't enemies but mutually constitutive. Taoism builds its entire metaphysics. Taoism builds its entire metaphysics on this yin and yang aren't enemies but mutually constitutive. The figure only exists because of the ground. There's also a strong phenomenological point here. Consciousness seems to register differences, not absolutes. There's also a strong phenomenological point here. Phenomenological point here. Consciousness seems to register differences, not absolutes. You don't feel the temperature of a room you have been in for an hour. You feel the change when you step outside. This is exactly what the pirate's curse dramatizes. Barbossa's crew lost contrast, endless existence with no hunger, no satiation, no risk of loss, flattened experience into nothing. Mortality is the contrast that gives life its edges. Mortality is the contrast that gives life its edges. Relationships. Contrast operates in at least two ways here. First, between people, differences in temperament, background, and perspective are often what makes a relationship generator rather than an echo chamber. Contrast operates in at least two ways here. First, between people, differences in temperament, background, and perspective are often what makes a relationship generator rather than an echo chamber. Differences in temperament, background, and perspective are often what makes a relationship generator rather than an echo chamber. The friend who challenges you is doing something the friend who agrees with you cannot. Second, within a relationship over time, closeness is felt most vividly against separation. Within a relationship over time, closeness is felt most vividly against separation. Absence, reunion, conflict, repair. The rhythm of distance and return is what keeps intimacy from becoming wallpaper. Within a relationship over time, closeness is felt most vividly against separation. Absence, reunion, conflict, repair. The rhythm of distance and return is what keeps intimacy from becoming wallpaper. Absence, reunion, conflict, repair. The rhythm of distance and return is what keeps intimacy from becoming wallpaper. Couples who never disagree sometimes don't have peace so much as flatness. The risk, of course, is that contrast without a shared foundation becomes mere friction. The art is difference held within trust. Animation and visual art. Here, contrast is almost the entire toolkit. Value contrast. Light against dark directs the eye. Here, contrast is almost the entire toolkit. Value contrast. Light against dark directs the eye. Animators and cinematographers stage important action in the zone of higher contrast. Stage important action in the zone of highest contrast. Color contrast creates emotional temperature. Think of how Pixar uses warm-cool shifts to mark emotional burns. There is also contrast in motion. Animation's principle of slow and slow out and the alternation of fast action with held poses is what makes movement legible and expressive. Slow in, slow out, and the alternation of fast action with held poses is what makes movement legible and expressive. A character who moves at constant speed reads as robotic. Even character design relies on it. Silhouettes are built from contrasting shapes. Jack Sparrow's flamboyant clutter against Norrington's rigid symmetry is doing visual philosophy. Technology. At the physical foundation, digital technology is contrast. The bit is nothing but a maximized distinction between two states, 0 and 1. And the physical foundation, digital technologies contrast. The bit is nothing but a maximized distinction between two states, 0 and 1. Engineers fight constantly to preserve that contrast against noise. Signal to noise ratio is literally a measure of meaningful difference. And the physical foundation, digital technologies contrast. The bit is nothing but a maximized distinction between the two states, 0 and 1. Engineers fight constantly to preserve that contrast against noise. Signal to noise ratio is literally a measure of meaningful difference. Contrast is both an accessibility requirement and an attention mechanism. The one red button among gray ones. Machine learning 2 runs on contrast. One is learned by discriminating between classes, and contrastive learning techniques work explicitly by teaching a system what makes things similar versus different. Conflict is contrast between desire and obstacle. Character arcs are contrast between who someone is at the start and the end. No change, no story. I actually wanted to send one of my buddies something interesting. Actually, this is what I want to share. Reality transurfing. Transurfing is a powerful tool for managing reality. Apply it and life will begin to change according to your order. When you use transurfing, goals are not reached so much as realized for the most part of themselves. It seems impossible to believe, but only at first. The ideas presented in the book have already received practical confirmation. Those who have tried transurfing experience surprise bordering on delight as the world of the transurfer inexplicably changes before their very eyes. What is this book about? Transurfing is the art of controlling reality using our freedom of choice. The world always reflects our perception of it. People can choose any variant of the development of current reality and thereby find themselves in circumstances they find desirable. I thought about a friend, so I will send him this thing. Storytelling. Stories are arguably contrast engines. Conflict is contrast between desire. Conflict is contrast between desire and obstacle. Character arcs are contrast between who someone is at the start and the end. No change, no story. Writers deliberately engineer comic relief beside tragedy, makes the tragedy hit harder. The quiet scene before the battle makes the battle louder. Foil characters exist purely to sharpen each other by difference. Will's earnestness makes Jack's slipperiness visible, and vice versa. Even at the sentence level, rhythm depends on contrast. A short sentence lands hard precisely because the long one just before it built a different cadence, like that. Wow, I'm feeling very sleepy right now. The unifying idea across all of these, the same structure repeats. Meaning is differential, not intrinsic. Nothing signifies in isolation. Things signify against backgrounds, alternatives, and opposites. Information theory makes this almost mathematical. Shannon defined information as the resolution of uncertainty. Nothing signifies in isolation. Things signify against backgrounds. A difference that makes a difference. indifference that makes a difference. A world of pure uniformity would contain no information, no perception, no story, no love distinguishable from indifference. A world full of uniformity would contain no information, no perception, no story, no love indistinguishable from indifference. Tell me how the biggest mathematicians at the end of their life just become philosophers. A world of pure uniformity would contain no information, no perception, no story, no love distinguishable from indifference. That's practical corollary word setting. If contrast generates meaning, then comfort maximizing, eliminating all friction, difficulty, and variation from life may quietly drain meaning rather than increase happiness. The fasting that makes the feast, the winter that makes the spring, the pirate's curse, again, really getting everything all the time with no shadow, turns out to be its own kind of damnation. Damnation. There's real truth in this observation, though it's a strong tendency rather than a law, and the reasons behind it are fascinating. The pattern example. Kurt Gödel is the archetype. After his incompleteness theorems revolutionized logic in his 30s, he spent his later decades at Princeton barely publishing mathematics at all. Instead, immersing himself in Leibniz, working on a formal version of the ontological argument for God's existence, and developing a full-blown Platonist philosophy in which mathematical objects are as real as physical ones and perceived by a kind of intuition. Developing a full-blown Platonist philosophy in which mathematical objects are as real as physical ones and perceived by a kind of intuition, Alexander Grothendieck, arguably the greatest mathematician of the 20th century, abandoned mathematics at the height of its powers and spent his final decades writing thousands of pages of philosophical, spiritual, and autobiographical meditation. Heckold Alexander Grothendieck. Heckold is Heckold. What is Heckold? Heckold is coming. Katai or Duai. Katai. Heckold. Oh, Heckold means harvest. Yes. Is less a math text than a confession about creativity, ego, and the soul. George Cantor, who created the mathematics of infinity, increasingly devoted himself to theology, convinced that his transfinite numbers had been communicated to him by God. This is so interesting. He created the mathematics of infinity, increasingly devoted himself to theology, convinced that his transfinite numbers had been communicated to him by God, and corresponding with Catholic theologians after the absolute infinite. Hermann Weyl drifted ever deeper into the philosophy of mathematics and Husserlian phenomenology. Blaise Pascal abandoned mathematics almost entirely for religious philosophy. Wow. Abandoned mathematics almost entirely for religious philosophy, giving us the pensée. Even G.H. Hardy, the militant purist, spent his later years writing a mathematician's apology, not mathematics, but a meditation on beauty, youth, and what the mathematical life means. Oh my God. Tell me more. Wow. Newton, for that matter, spent more of his life on theology and alchemy than on physics. Theology and alchemy than on physics. Why it happened, the structural reason. Mathematics pursued deeply enough runs into philosophy whether you want it or not. If you spend 50 years proving theorems, eventually the question stops being is this true and becomes what is truth here? What are these objects I have been manipulating? Why does the universe obey them? Gödel's own theorems showed that mathematics cannot fully ground itself from within. Gödel's own theorems show that mathematics cannot fully ground itself from within, so anyone who cares about the foundations is pushed outside mathematics to philosophy. So anyone who cares about the foundations is pushed outside mathematics to philosophy. The discipline has a trap door at the bottom, and the people who dig deepest are the ones who fall through it. Physicists experience something similar with quantum mechanics. Mathematicians get it with infinity foundations and the eerie effectiveness of abstraction. Fluid intelligence peaks early, which is why mathematics is famously a young person's game. The lightning fast combinatorial power. The field's metal cuts off at 40, but crystallized intelligence, the capacity for synthesis, judgment, and seeing the shape of the whole keeps growing. So the natural late career move is from proving to reflecting, from solving problems to asking what the problems mean. Philosophy is exactly the genre where a lifetime of accumulated perspective outweighs raw processing speed. Philosophy is exactly the genre where a lifetime of accumulated perspective outweighs raw processing speed. Existential reason. And then there's mortality, your contrast principle again, actually. A young mathematician is racing the clock against rivals, an old one is racing it against death. The approach of the end reframes everything. What was the work for? Hardy's Apology is explicitly a book written by a man mourning his lost creative powers and trying to justify his life. Grothendieck's writings are saturated with questions of meaning, vanity, and spirit. When the theorem proving engine slows, what remains is the question the engine never had time for. Why did any of this matter? The question has no mathematical answer. The question has no mathematical answer. Meaning, vanity, spirit. Why did any of this matter? The honest caveats. Plenty of great mathematicians never made this turn. Euler computed until literally the day he died. Erdos proved theorem into his 80s and wanted nothing to do with metaphysics. And some, like Russell and Whitehead, were philosopher mathematicians with the start rather than converts at the end. So the truer version of your claim might be kind of latent philosophy, and the mathematicians with the deepest temperaments tend to make that latent content explicit once age strips away the speed, the computation, and the illusion of unlimited time. Mathematicos and philosophos were nearly the same vocation, and Plato's Academy allegedly barred entry to anyone ignorant of geometry. Late-life mathematicians, true philosophers, aren't leaving their field. In a sense, they're coming home to it. Gladly, harvest and sowings, Recolt et Semai, one of the strangest and most haunting documents in the history of mathematics. A meditation on creativity. The most beloved passages describe what discovery actually feels like from the inside. He distinguishes the builder from the explorer, writes about the fertility of solitude, and insists that the capacity that matters in research isn't intelligence but a kind of innocence. Isn't intelligence but a kind of innocence, the willingness to be alone, to not know, to look at things as a child does. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, yes, yes. Writes about the fertility of solitude and insists that the capacity that matters in research isn't intelligence but a kind of innocence, the willingness to be alone, to not know, to look at things as a child does. He describes himself as less brilliant than many colleagues but more willing to dwell patiently in confusion. Wow. A spiritual confession. Threaded through everything is self-examination and an almost Augustinian register analysis of his own vanity, his relationship to his parents. His father was an anarchist revolutionary who died in Auschwitz. His childhood was spent partly in internment camps, dreams, and what he called the conflict between the creative child and the boss, or self-image that suffocates it. Later writings went further into the explicitly mystical and including thousands of pages of meditations on dreams as messages and on God. 91, he vanished, moved to tiny Pyrenean village, refused nearly all contact, demanded his works be withdrawn from publication, lived as a hermit, reportedly absorbed in writing tens of thousands of pages of meditations until his death. The villagers knew him as an eccentric old man who grew his own food. Most had no idea he was among the greatest mathematicians who ever lived. Extreme case of pattern we discussed from Grothendieck. The mathematics and metaphysics were never really separate. The same drive that pushed him to seek the most general structure behind every theorem eventually pushed past mathematics entirely toward the structure behind the self, behind creativity, behind existence. The tragedy, or maybe the consistency, is that he followed the abstraction all the way out of the world, and there's your contrast principle once more. In its darkest form, the man who gave mathematics its most expansive vision of unity ended in the most radical isolation, as if total generality and total solitude were two faces of the same pursuit. Most expansive vision of unity ended in the most radical isolation.